So, good morning.
Morning.
To get us started, I'm going to sing I'm a Little Teacup. Everybody's going to stand up and they're going to, oh wait, that's a different lecture. So, my name is Jackson Moore, and I was so graciously invited by Connie to come and speak to you all about my near-death experience. It is something that profoundly changed my course in life as a child. And I think as I talk, I want you to draw parallels in my experience and how they apply to you and life. Because many of you have experienced some of these things and maybe just don't realize, what that means in your particular situation. So my journey began as I was a child. I grew up in upstate New York, about yay far from the Canadian border, probably 45 minutes south of the Canadian border. And up there, there's just cows and apple orchards. Everybody thinks I'm from New York. They think the city, 7.5 hours away, not so. So we had cows, ducks, pigs, chickens, and a kind of a self-sufficient farm out in the country. And with the cattle, we would put up hay in the winter, and we would feed the hay to the cattle. And then in the summer, if there was any hay left over, myself and my friend, I was 10 years old, we would go in there and we would build hay forts. Now, my neighbor across the street experienced this event with me. He was about a similar age as me, and he had 3 sisters. And of course, at 10 years old, all the girls have cooties, and you don't want to be around girls because you don't want girl germs, right? So us boys would run from the girls. They would try to pursue us. And we decided we needed a secure fort in the barn so that they would not be able to find us. So we had some hay left over from the winter feed, and we decided to build a hay fort. So inside the barn, we took a bunch of hay bales and we built them up and made like a wall that appeared like it was maybe 8 feet thick, and it went all the way to the ceiling, and it looked like it was just solid hay. But if you would move one of the bales out of there, you could look inside and it was empty. So this is our secret hiding fort. And so once we got that built and we got that set up, we then went up to my house and we stole all my dad's Fritos out of the cupboard, and we got the lemonade out of the fridge. And if there was something we could grab out of the kitchen to take it in there, we did. We took a 5-gallon pail that we used for feeding and turned it over inside of the fort and put a little piece of plywood on it. That's our table. We got chairs in there. This is our resort, right? So now, while we got this kind of thing in play, my dad had made a swing out of baling twine. And for those of you who know, it's a circle piece of twine that goes around the bale. And he had tied a swing onto the ceiling beam that was about 30 feet above the floor that supports the roof. And so we played on it enough that we broke the swing, and I decided I was going to take a bunch of baling twine, I was going to climb up those hay bales, and I was going to tie those strings on there and make our swing. So my friend, Ed, who was inside the fort, we put the hay bales back so if the girls came down, they wouldn't be able to tell that it was a secret little fort. And so he was inside of there. I took the baling twine, I climbed up the bales, and the twine that my dad had tied onto the ceiling beam, it was out a little bit farther than I could reach. And at the time I was 10 years old, so I wasn't too big. But I remember I had to reach around and grab the side of the barn behind me. And I stood on the edge of the bale looking down over about 30 feet below me. And I reached out and I grabbed the baling twine and I brought it back. And I was going to tie some of the other baling twine on there. So being the smart individual and the adventurous fellow that, young boys do with no fear, I decided to take this piece of string and I put it around my neck, and I had my fingers in there. So I decided I was going to stand on the edge of the bale and I was going to lean out over the floor, kind of on an angle like this with my feet on the bale. And I was swinging back and forth like over the floor. I was like, this is fun. So my dad had watched every Western that there was. He was into Clint Eastwood Westerns and John Wayne Westerns and that sort of thing. And in the Western, they always hung somebody. And I get this idea, I wonder what that felt like. Right? So I pull my fingers out And I think, okay, if I get woozies, I'll put my fingers back in, right? So for a minute, I was literally leaning on an angle and I was swinging, hanging out kind of over the floor. And I felt the head rush, and all the blood rush kind of in my head. And the very next thing I know, I passed out. And so the minute that I passed out from oxygenated blood to my brain, my body went limp, my feet fell off the bale, and I was hanging from the ceiling beam. He's inside the fort, has no idea this is going on. And so the very next thing I know, and I've talked to a number of people now that I've met that have described similar experiences, and it can be anything. It can be any experience because it's consciousness. And in my particular experience, it was like being in outer space, but with no stars, no light anywhere. It was warm, it was beautiful, it was comforting. This is normal, there's no fear. And the first thing I remember as I became conscious of being there was I lifted up my hands, and my hands and my body was in the shape of my human body, but it was white, bluish white, bright, glowing light. And if you know what a hologram looks like, it looked like I was a hologram. And I was looking at my hands, and they were see-through, and it was like millions of speckles of rainbows, like all the color of the light. So that kind of fascinated for me for a minute. And then I looked down, because I was aware that I was floating and there was nothing around me. And I looked down to see what was holding me up in seemingly space. There was nothing underneath my feet. My entire body was like this see-through hologram. And then I looked over my right shoulder. There was nothing holding me up. There was nothing over my left shoulder holding me up. And I asked a question in my head, which then seemed like it resounded from everywhere around me. And I said, "Where am I?" And this voice came from all around me, and it was a very deep, strong male voice. And I won't say it was the voice of God because I knew who it was now. But the voice said, "You are safe," in a very loving voice. And the minute it said that, I could see a big spark out in front of me. And I don't know that I floated to it or it floated to me, but I see what people mean when they say they saw the tunnel. To me, it was this big, brilliant ball of white light. It was so bright you couldn't see anything but the bright white, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. I grew closer to it, and as I floated closer to it, I could see shapes in the outside of the light, like figures. And then I figured out they were people. And then I saw my grandparents. Well, my grandparents had been dead for a number of years, and so I was like, "Oh, grandma, grandpa." Now, to me here, this is normal, right? So I'm not thinking, "Oh, this is weird." To me, this is normal. There. And so as I got closer, my grandmother and my grandfather met me and stuff, and they said, "We are so proud of you that you're in Cub Scouts and you're doing really well and you're earning merit badges and you're doing this with your life. This is a really good path for you." And then after that, some angels came in. And to me, then, and still today, when I see them clairvoyantly, they do not appear like they have wings. People depict that because they float, they move. They're not tied to anything, they're pure energy. So to me, they look like me, like the shape of a human, but they didn't have a nose and mouth. And they communicate telepathically. Much more energy, much brighter, much larger. I would say if I had to compare it to me being 6 feet tall, they were 7 to 8 feet tall. And they came in and they circled around me, and we had a conversation where they said that I had a mission to do, and that the people on earth did not understand some of the truths as to the truths of God, of nature, of the soul, and that I had a mission. And of course, to me, I'm like, okay. And so that I had this whole experience. And when you understand consciousness and outside of physical reality, when you die, there is no time and space. Time and space is simply an illusion. And what happens is your soul projects, when you're incarnated into the human body, your soul projects a portion of itself because the body is not big enough to hold that much power. It will project a portion of itself into the human flesh, which creates the flesh, the atoms and molecules to grow the baby. And then when the consciousness resides within that, then you're born. And from that moment on, when you're born, you are now using your 5 human senses, taste, touch, feel, smell, to gain a picture of physical reality. Now your body is within physical reality, so you use your 5 human senses as a filter through which you are viewing and perceiving physical reality, right? So back to the NDE, one of the last things at the end of that, I again asked the same question, was where am I? And this again encompassing voice said, you are safe, but you must go back now, for your work is not yet done. Quote unquote, exactly what they said. And the minute it said that, boom, I was back in the barn. And I'm in the barn, I'm closer than me to her away, probably about 3 feet. I'm floating at the top of the barn, looking at my body hanging lifeless. And the rope breaks, and I hear the rope break. I watch my body fall to the floor. I'm laying on the floor and I'm all crumpled up. And I floated over top of my body. And it was just totally normal, no fear. And I literally remember saying, wow, that's my body in this lifetime. I wonder if I'm going to continue to live. I wonder if I'm going to continue to grow in this lifetime. And so then, oh, I need to tell my mom. So I travel outside the barn through the wall instantaneously, and I'm in the kitchen. My mom is doing dishes in the kitchen. And I approach my mom, and to me, I'm standing there, right? I'm 18 inches away, and I'm like, Mom, I don't want to tell her about this wild experience. She has no idea that I'm there. So I can't get her attention. So then I float back down to the barn, float inside the little fort where my buddy's in there playing and eating Fritos and pouring lemonade and such. And then I floated back over my body again. And as I did, I got closer and closer and closer. And essentially I was looking at my body and at my face. And then when I got about a foot or so away, I went from looking at it to then all of a sudden my consciousness went back into the body. My soul went back into the body. And then the minute it did that, then all of a sudden I went from looking at it to being within. And it felt like I was hit with defib paddles. And I felt like a giant shock of energy. My body jolted, I do know that. And then I went, and I took this big deep breath and I started breathing again. But at that point, I'd been dead for some time. I don't know how long. But in heaven and in non-physical reality and what they call heaven, you can experience 2 weeks there in an instant here. So because there's no time there, you can experience many, many, many things, but maybe you were only dead for 60 seconds. I had cooled off, my body had cooled off to the point where when I came back like that, I felt my heart beat again, and I could literally feel like hot heat from my chest where the blood was still warm, it going out through and into my shoulders and into my arms, down to my legs. And if anybody's ever had your leg fall asleep before, and you know that tingly, don't touch it, that's what my entire body felt like. But I could feel the warm blood going through, and my flesh was cool enough that I could tell the temperature difference, that the blood was warm and my arm and my extremities were not. So now I'm scared to death. And now I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna die. I saw dead grandparents, I went to heaven, I saw the light, I saw angels, I had conversations with beings of light. Some of them were just like a big orb, like a ball of light, didn't have a present to me like a human body type of form. And I had all these experiences and I was like, I'm gonna die. Well, so that was scary. And so I start screaming in my head, and I'm literally screaming as loud as I can, but there's no oxygenated blood to my vocal cords, so there's nothing coming out. So after a few seconds, the blood got there and I cracked my voice and it was like, and then I get this big scream out. My buddy comes out, he pops the veil out of the way, he comes out and he's like, oh my God, what happened? He runs out, he drops down onto the floor where I'm laying there and I can't move. And he scoops up my head and he holds my head on his knees and stuff like that. And I could see like the outline of his face, but I couldn't make out his nose and all his features yet. And I said to him, I said, go get Mom. I said, I'm dying. And I said, please go get my mom. So he stands up and he runs to the barn to go to get my mom, goes to the door. And then I said, wait, stop. I said, come back, will you please come back? And he comes back and he gets down on his knees again, scoops up my head and he's holding my head. And I said, will you hold me until I'm dead? I said, I don't want to die alone. Will you please hold me until I'm dead? And he starts bawling. And then he was crying, I started crying, and I remember, because I was laying down, that I was facing up, looking at him as he was holding my head. Tears started coming down out of my eyes, and they were going down the side of my face. And the tears were hot, which meant my flesh was cold. So however long I'd been there, my body had cooled off enough that the tears felt hot. And then, of course, within a few seconds, he was holding me and stuff. My muscles started twitching from the blood getting to them. And then eventually I wound up sitting up and, he's like, are you okay? And I'm like, I gotta go. So I ran up to talk to my mom. And luckily my mom was spiritual. She had read spiritual books and she knew, about the soul and a little bit about out-of-body experiences and what they call near-death experiences. And so I come running into the house, got a big red welt across my neck and stuff. And I said, Mom, I died. I went to heaven. I talked to Grandpa like 100 miles an hour, right? I'm just talking as fast as I can talk. And she's like, sit down. What happened to your neck? And I said, I just told you. I had the rope around my neck and I was playing and I passed out and I fell. And so I went through that whole thing. And she's like, you had an out-of-body experience, or what they call a near-death experience, to which I popped back really instantaneously, and I said, near death my ass. I said I was dead, and she's like, language, right? So, and I was like, I'm telling you, I said, Mom, when I was floating over my body, it was like, there's nobody home. Like, it's lifeless. No brain activity, and you can tell there's no brain activity, there's no breath, there's no heartbeat. I'm like, my body was dead. I said, so how, first of all, did I talk to dead grandparents? How did I talk to angels? And I was like, then how could I see my body from outside my body if my body's dead? How could I see it? And I said, I heard the rope break. I specifically, boom, the rope break, my body falls to the floor. I floated up here and I told her the whole story. And I was like, how do I do any of that? So she kind of tried to explain to me what she knew, about the soul, and she had heard about out-of-body experiences and that sort of thing before. And so from that point on, I will tell you, if you ever have even an out-of-body experience, it's very profound, but in the near-death experience, or when you die, and there's a lot of people that have died over operating tables and that sort of thing, and I've talked to many, your experience can be a little bit different of heaven based on beliefs and various things and things you want to learn, and then, of course, coming back. But I said to my mom, I'm like, I'm 10 years old. What work do I have to do? Like, I gotta play. That's my job, right? My job is to play and go fishing and feed the animals. And so we had this conversation and we kind of went through that. And I just thought, okay, well, that's neat. Don't do that again. And then within a week or two, I started experiencing a lot of psychic events. And I remember specifically every night when I would go to dream, every single night, I would dream that I was leaving my body, floating over top of it in my bed, going outside the house, flying around. Sometimes my brother would fly with me. And I didn't understand it really at the time. But then I started having precognitive events, and I started seeing the future before it would happen. So I would explain to somebody, this is this and this and this, and this is gonna happen. And like 2 or 3 days later, it would happen, and they were like, how did you know that? I was like, I don't know, didn't you know that? So, at 10 years old, I'm thinking this is normal. And the really profound thing was probably about 2 weeks after my experience, I was playing in my room and I run out into the kitchen and my mom was again cleaning or something. And I said to my mom, her brother, his name was Mike, my Uncle Mike, and then my Uncle Mike's his wife was Brenda. And I said, hey, Uncle Mike and Aunt Brenda are going to the beach and they want to know if me and the boys can come. I got 3 boy siblings. And she's like, what? And I said, Uncle Mike and Aunt Brenda are going to the beach. They want to know if me and the boys can come. Can we go? And she's like, what are you talking about? I was like, what do you not understand about that? That's pretty easy, right? They're going to the beach. They want to know if we can go. So while I'm having this conversation, the phone rings. We're standing literally right there. She picks up the phone. She's like, hello? Hey, Arlene, this is Mike. Brennan and I are going to go to the beach. Do you and the boys want to go? And I hear this, right? And my mom looks at me and she's like, well, yeah, I guess we do. And she's like, okay, so we'll stop by in a little while and pick you up. So she hangs up the phone. And I said, see, there you go, right? And so she's like, how did you do that? And I was like, do what? And she's like, you knew exactly what was going to happen before it occurred. And I was like, okay, doesn't everybody do that? And she's like, no, they don't. And so that I'm like, I'm 10. How do I know that? I was like, I don't know. And I said, I was playing in my room, and as I was playing, I get this little daydream in my head, and I see this little movie, and I ran out there, and Uncle Mike called, and he asked if we wanted to go to the beach, and you said yes. And I said, so I ran out to ask you. She said, you asked me before it happened. And I was like, I don't know how I did that. So that began the questions. And then I grew up Catholic. My mom was Catholic, her family was Catholic. My dad didn't like the Catholic Church because we went there and they would scream in our faces, literally come up sometimes, as a kid, at a foot in front of your face and say, you're a miserable sinner, you're going to hell, scared us kids to death. And my dad said, I don't like them scaring the kids. So we tried to go to Methodist Church and Protestant Church and other denominations that were a little bit less extreme than that particular church we went to. But I knew immediately that what they were saying in church and some of the teachings they were talking about Christ was not the truth, because some of them were, some of them were not. And I will tell you, when you experience something at the soul level, and this is what I teach now, when you experience something at the soul level, there is not a human word in any language that somebody can convince you that that's not real or whatever else, because it is literally the soul that creates your body and gives you life. It is the God energy that is within you. And that energy is infinite potential to create your world, to heal your body, to create money, job, material, and to develop your abilities. So long story short, because I don't have a whole lot of time, I asked a lot of questions. I started reading a lot of books. My mom had read a Seth book, and for me, it was pretty in-depth, so I perused it. But from that point on, I asked many, many questions, and that set me on that journey. To me now, that was a delineation event where from that point on, I was no longer interested in going to church. I wanted to learn the truth myself. I didn't want to have somebody tell me what they thought the truth was. I wanted to learn it myself. So I began meditating at a very young age, trying to bring that in and develop that. And then as I grew into a teenager, I learned if I would talk about it to my friends in school, they would call me a freak, right? They'd be like, okay, so you're psychic, read my mind, what am I thinking? It doesn't work that way. And I said, sometimes I can tell exactly what somebody's thinking. I can repeat a sentence that they're just about to say, but I don't try to do that. It just happens. And I didn't understand then. And then I started seeing death, plane crashes, train crashes, accidents. And I didn't understand then, but I do now, that it's not about the morbidity of the death. It's about the energy that we sense as intuitive souls. And I foresaw at this one point when I was about 18 years old with my girlfriend. We were about to walk up from her parents' house. There was a movie place where you could rent a VHS movie right up the street. And we started walking out. We're gonna rent a movie, watch a movie with their parents, and we're walking out the porch. And I stop and I do this thing, and I'm like, I feel this energy. And she's like, it's happening again, isn't it? And I said, yes. And she's like, what is it? And I said, there's a silver car, there's a red truck, there's a four-way stop sign, and I said, or a light. And I said, the truck runs the stop sign, it T-bones a car, there's a male, we go to school with him, but I don't know who it is, and I see blood. And so I'm kind of freaked out about this. And she said, you sit here, don't go in the house, my parents will think you're a freak. And she said, then I'll go up and rent the movie. So she goes up and walks up in the dark to rent the movie. 10 minutes later, the fire whistle goes off, all the ambulances and fire trucks and stuff. She comes running out of the dark and she said, oh my God, Jimmy just got hit and T-boned. And it was a red truck that ran the red light right up there at the corner where the movie rental place was. And she said, it happened exactly like you said, and there was blood on her. And I said, you're bleeding. And she said, it's not mine, it's Jimmy's. He was stuck in the truck, I couldn't get him out. The door was crushed. And that freaked me out. And so, I took off running and I ran about half a mile across this golf course across the street from where they lived. And the moon was out and I dropped down onto my knees on this green and I just cried for like an hour. And I said, whatever this is, this whole death thing, I said, I don't want it anymore. I don't want it. I want it out. Whatever it is, they call it a gift, I don't want it. Like, I'm done with it. But the psychic stuff still stayed there, but I didn't see a lot of the events like I did until later in life. I experienced some very profound things. I don't have enough time to go through the details, but suffice it to say, in a very short time of frame, Spirit wanted me to get back on my spiritual path. I didn't listen. They gave me hints. I still didn't listen. They gave me a lot of hints, and I still didn't listen. Then they took the cosmic 2x4 and they whacked me upside the head, and that hurt. So what I'm saying is, if Spirit wants to get your attention to change path, to go within, they'll get your attention. And if you do not listen to those physical signs that are going on around you, then something will happen, like there'll be a death in the family, a divorce, you lose your job, whatever it is. In this case, I went from making a 6-figure salary, very successful in my career. I owned 10 acres in the mountains in Arizona, land in Missouri where I was living. Life was good. And I went through a series of lawsuits with my son's mother, and she sued me, won a bunch of money, took my money, hired more attorneys, sued me again, took everything that I had, and I lost. Today, it would be worth millions. And she brought me to my knees. And I was out of work. I lost my job because I was applying for other jobs, and I accepted an offer, and then it was a verbal offer over the phone, making more money so that I could afford to pay the attorney fees and everything else. But one day I found out it was 2 years that I was out of work, and it was in February, and the water pipes in my house froze and they burst. My propane had run out. I didn't have the money. I borrowed more money off my dad and friends and family that I could to try to stay afloat while I was applying for jobs. And so they shut the electricity off. The water pipes burst because the heat was shut off, and I ran out of propane. So I went to the Salvation Army, and you can look it up, it's in public record. I went to the Salvation Army, and I stood there in Platte County, Missouri. You look up Platte City, Platte County, Missouri, north of Kansas City, and I stood there in line with homeless people that hadn't bathed in 2 months. And it's nothing against them, but I thought to myself, how did I go from this to this? And it was really a very profound cuff with a 2x4 upside the head to pay attention. That was my time to turn back within. And the only way that I could change it was meditation and going back in. That's when I started bringing in the meditation, channeling. I learned to eventually channel angels and receive direct guidance myself. So the part of me that was floating at the top of the barn, that's what I focused on, developing that, developing my clairvoyance, my clairaudience, my clairsentience, and all of my clairabilities to get the answers myself so that I knew how to change my life. And I never thought I'd be teaching. And then a number of years ago, it's probably about 8 years ago now, I was channeling, and I had, normally it would be angels, and I sat down, I'd do my meditation and clear my head and clear my space. And then when I get done, I got out a journal and I would write questions, and then I would listen for answers and I would write them down, whatever came to me. And when you do that, and I teach that as well, is that pretty soon you start getting answers that are very profound. And you get stuff like, he who knows and is the light shall make the darkness end. Like, who says that? That is not coming from my brain. That's coming from somewhere else. And they would use words that I didn't even know what the words meant. And so they knew that I would have to look the word up. And then when I looked it up, it was used in the proper form, in the proper context, which validated to me that this is not coming from my brain. I'm channeling this. And so eventually one day I began channeling this entity, and it was very different from the energy of the angels. And to explain it to you all, it would be like, how would you explain to somebody the difference between cold water and hot water if they didn't have nerves to feel that or sense that, right? It's hard to explain that, but that's the difference you feel in energy. And so when you've tuned your abilities and your vibration up and stuff like that, this entity was much different. And finally, after about 3 days, I asked him, I said, do you have a name that you go by, or do you not have a name? And he said, consciousness does not have nor use names in non-physical reality, but you may call me Seth. I am the multidimensional conscious collective that authored all of the Seth books with Jane Roberts from 1963 to 1984. And of course, I literally laughed out loud. And I was like, yeah, right, okay, 6 billion people on the planet, and Seth is gonna come to me. So I soaked with that for a while, and then Cindy Green, we just mentioned her. She's been a friend of mine for over 20-something years, and I went to Angel Message gallery reading where she has 200 people in the room, and I would set up the video camera to record those for her, and then sit up next to her and play the angel message when she was doing that stuff. And so my grandmother came through that had passed away, the angels came through, and then she said, Jackson, she said, I have a bright, brilliant light, and she said, usually that's like Christ consciousness or a multidimensional conscious collective. And she said, this conscious collective, Seth, says to tell you, yes, he is channeling with you, he is working with you, and if you'll just quiet the questions in the rational mind, he'll give you advice not only to improve your own life, but to share with the world. And so that's where that began. And now we're writing books, I'm speaking, I'm teaching, I'm doing lectures, and I'm teaching about the nature of consciousness, the nature of the soul, our connection to everything that you would call God by any and all names, you know, God, source, creator, whatever. And our innate connection. When they say God is omnipresent, omnipotent, and all of the omniscience, it is true. Because from a level of consciousness, consciousness is inseparable from all other consciousness, which means you are connected to every other person on the planet, the trees, the animals, and everything. And to your point, when you were talking to me when I first came in, when you shift your perception from thinking I'm a human being to the perception that I am being human, then all of a sudden you're looking at life through the lens of being the soul, which is unlimited, as opposed to the human, which is limited to just the 5 human senses. So now when you develop this portion of you, you have physical senses, but all of the clairabilities, telepathy, and everything else, where you see things from a different perspective. And so that's what I teach, and that's what I lecture. And there'll be more books. We have 7 in the works. There'll be another one coming out, which will be volume 2. I put volume 1 at the back of the room, if anybody would like to purchase one of those. But the nature of consciousness, volume 1, is fundamental understandings about the nature of the human soul and consciousness within all physical reality. The next book will be about earth consciousness and how we relate to plants, animals, trees, communication with animals, and we do communicate with them, and plants, we can as well. So those are the things that we're teaching there, and then the next one will be called The Avatar of the Soul. And that book will explain many more things in detail.